welcome to another exciting episode of Tori's Tea Time Talk with God, where we spill the tea on the Word of God. Okay, so we are ready for another exciting episode as we get in the Word. And remember, as always, follow me as I follow Christ. Share as you are led by the Spirit of God, and like it if you like it. Okay, so we're at Genesis chapter 7, verse 18. We are still on the life of Noah. And, I want to just recap one thing from our previous episode that I want us to keep in mind as we move forward, and that I will be continuing to point out as we go through this journey in the Word of God, and to specifically today, because there are going to be a few more numbers that we're going to encounter in our reading today. And so for that reason, I want to recap verse 17, which we did end on in our last episode, but to remind you, to put you in remembrance of these things, though I know you know them, because you've seen my previous episode. But in verse 17, it says, "And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth." And so we talked about the significance of that number 40, and where we see that number 40 not only appearing right here, but where that number 40 also appeared in the wilderness. And again, remember, we connected the fact that if you think of the ark is like a wilderness. It was like a wilderness. I mean, from the point of God doing what you would expect to see in a wilderness. You know, you would expect to see animals in the wilderness, vegetation, because he had to make sure everything that was needed for them to survive on this, in this ark was there. And so, that being the case, it would have been like the wilderness. And so then we connected how we see that number 40 appears once again, and how it was a high and lifted up place, just like we see here. It was 40 days and 40 nights, high and lifted up above the earth. We see in terms of Moses, he was 40 days and 40 nights, which ended up being doubled to get the 10 commandments. And he was on a mountain. He was high and lifted up, while everyone else was where? Below. We see the same thing happening with Yeshua. And there are other examples, because Elijah also was in a high and lifted up place for 40 days in a cave. So we see that there are examples of where this 40 days is appearing, where there's a wilderness that is attached to it, and there is a high place that those who are in that place, or that place of protection, that place of provision, that place of being connected with the Father, which is so vitally important to understand why God does not like any other high places than the ones he have instructed us to be a part of. In other words, if God didn't tell you to get in the ark, he didn't tell you to build an ark, get in the ark, and then he's the one who lifts you up in that high place, then you have to begin to ask yourself the question, is this the place God has called me to be? Same thing with Moses. He went to the place that he was called to be, and and God met him there. Same thing with Yeshua. He went to where God has called him to be, and God met him there. Now, of course, understand that we also see an example in Yeshua of his 40 days in the wilderness, that there was an enemy who was there as well, who was tempting him for 40 days and 40 nights. And even though we don't see it stated here concerning Noah, we can infer that it had to be some temptations on that boat. I mean, you're talking about people who had a whole world to explore at their fingertips, and now they're confined into a space where they're not able to really see the light of day like they did before. They're seeing more like obscure visions. They're hearing sounds without being able to really understand the full fullness of what was happening outside of where they were. Though they were protected in the ark, they are also isolated from the world that they knew. And so that's important to know, that when God sometimes separates us from the things that are familiar to us, so that he can get us in a place where we are isolated unto him, so that he can do something fresh and new in our lives. So it's all about perspective, and it's also all about knowing what God is doing in the earth. So we're going to continue to move on now that we've discussed that. And the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth. And the ark went upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Okay, so I want to point out the 15 cubits, because many of us, what do we know about a cubit? And so it's important that we figure this out. So I'm going to go to KJV Plus. We're going to look at that cubits. Okay, we're going to look at it in the Strong's. Okay, so it is like the distance of a forearm. Well, of course, as a unit of measurement, that might be harder to make a clear distinction in terms of actual size for us, because everybody's forearm is not going to be the same size. So one could say, okay, so here we have in Brown's Jarvis Briggs, we can't really find what you need in one source. That's why it's important to not stop there. A measure of distance, roughly 18 inches. So basically, if you're talking about 18 inches times 15, because we're talking about it is 15 cubits upward. So did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. In all flesh. So I just think we need to really explore what 18 times 15 is going to look like. And so 18 times 15. So we're talking about 270, roughly, approximately 270 inches. So if we're talking about 270 inches, we're talking about 22 feet of rain. Okay, 22 and a half feet of rain. That's a lot of rain, y'all. So, So, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beasts and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. This was a worldwide event, and all in whose nostrils was the breath of life of all that was in the dry land died. And so when we look at this, recognize that in this type of, God is basically telling us in these two verses, it's the same information. He's just saying it a different way. In other words, if all flesh died, that's all flesh died. He is going through the detail of what that means. And it's important that he did do that, because we live in a day and hour where there are mockers in the earth who would question that. And so it's essential that, hey, look, we cover every single nook and cranny, because he knows how mankind is. This is why he had to start over, because of the wickedness of mankind's heart and our tendency to stray. So this is all we can cover today. We did make it to verse 22. I'm excited about I'm excited about that. And we will pick up again on the next episode in verse 23. Shalom.